class, to the third ideal, the wedding night. Song of Solomon, chapter 4, verse 1. How beautiful you are, my darling. How beautiful you are. Your eyes are like doves behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats that have descended from Mount Gilead. The aim of the seventh reflection is to give a fuller detailed description of the wedding night already partially described in the third reflection. In the third reflection, the primary concern was the effects of the wedding night on Shulamit. However, here, in the seventh reflection, the primary concern is with the effects on Solomon. It is Solomon who speaks the entire passage, with the exception of verse 16, where Shulamit speaks. As in the third reflection, because of certain sensitivities on the part of many believers, some elements of the details described in the Hebrew text, will not be brought out in this exposition. Thus, the events will be explained in more general terms. We will look at this verse 1 again. It's at the top, and read the bullets. Reflection 7 begins with Solomon praising the outward attributes of his wife, beginning with her head and working down. Solomon starts out with a general description. How beautiful you are, my darling. Then he begins to speak of specific features regarding her outward beauty. Her eyes are like doves behind her veil. It was customary for the bride to be veiled on the wedding night, and we know that from Genesis 24:65. It was called a veil because it hid the bride's face. This accounts for Jacob's inability to recognize the fact that on his wedding night was spent with Leah, not with Rachel. But in the case of Shulamit, her eyes gleam through the veil. Her hair is like a flock of goats. In Israel, the goats are mostly black. Shulamit's hair is described as a flock of black goats reposing on a steep slope of the mountainside, giving the appearance of hanging down on the sides of the cliffs. And let's read verses 2 through 4. Your teeth are like a flock of newly shorn ewes, which have come up from their washing, all of which bear twins. And not one among them has lost her young. Your lips are like a scarlet thread, and your mouth is lovely. Your temples are like a slice of pomegranate behind your veil. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built with rows of stones on which are hung 1,000 shields, all the round shields of the mighty men. Let's look at the bullets now. Her teeth are like a flock of newly shorn ewes, which have come up from their washing. Thus Solomon compares her teeth to sheep, which are mostly white. Her teeth are compared to shorn sheep because of their smoothness, and to washed sheep on account of their whiteness. Her teeth are like twin sheep because the two rows of teeth match each other. Her teeth are like a mother sheep, which has not lost any of her young, which means Shulamit has all of her teeth. Her lips are like a scarlet thread, and her mouth is lovely. Her temples are like a slice of pomegranate behind her veil. Thus Shulamit's lips are a scarlet crimson red, surrounding a beautiful mouth. The temples refer to the thin piece of skull and indented skin on the sides of her eyes. Her temples are the color of pomegranates, a mixture of dark and pale red. It is a redness tempered with a ruby color. Her neck is like the Tower of David. The tower was built on terraces surrounded by the shields of the royal guard. Shulamit's neck was long and surrounded by ornaments, giving the appearance of terraces. Verse 5 and 6 says, your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle, which feed among the lilies. Until the cool of the day, when the shadows flee away, I will go my way to the mountain of Myrrh and to the hill of frankincense. In verse 5, Solomon compares the bosom from which the breasts rise to a field covered with lilies where the twin-paired young gazelles feed. The latter reference is both to the breasts and the nipples of the breasts. In verse 6, Solomon begins to look forward to their first intercourse. The mountain of Myrrh and the hill of frankincense refer to what is known in other literature as the Mount of Venus. It is a reference to the female sexual organs centered in the area of the pubic hair, which covers a small mount. Having surveyed erotically the beauties of his bride, Solomon is anxious to enjoy her completely and to have their first intercourse together. Verses 7 and 8. You are altogether beautiful, my darling, and there is no blemish in you. Come with me from Lebanon, my bride. May you come with me from Lebanon. Journey down from the summit of Amana, from the summit of Senir and Hermon, and from the dens of lions, from the mountains of leopards. In verse 7, having previously extolled the specific features of his bride, Solomon says to Shulamit, you are altogether beautiful. He is totally satisfied with his bride. As his ecstasy over his bride is rising, he invites Shulamit to go with him to Lebanon, and then descend with him from the steep heights of the mountains for even more ecstatic experiences. The word translated journey has the secondary meaning of to view or to go in order to view. This verse is not giving the origin of Shulamit, for she is from Galilee. Rather, Solomon is asking his bride to travel with him so she can view some ecstatic sights from the summit of Amana, from the summit of Senir and Hermon. Verse 9, you have made my heart beat faster, my sister, my bride. You have made my heart beat faster with a single glance of your eyes, with a single strand of your necklace. In verse 9, the word bride is used for the first time in this song. The Hebrew word comes from a root which means to pierce through and carries the meaning of that which is brought to completion. Putting the two concepts together, the Hebrew word used for bride refers to one who has reached the goal of her womanly calling, that of becoming a sexual partner to her husband, thus perfectly completing herself and him. Verse 9 further describes Solomon's ecstasy as the very look of Shulamit begins to ravish Solomon towards sexual arousal. Verses 10 and 11. How beautiful is your love, my sister, my bride. How much better is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your oils than all kinds of spices. Your lips, my bride, drip honey. Honey and milk are under your tongue, and the fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. Solomon now begins to initiate foreplay and further describes the features of his bride. The word for love in verse 10 is dad, the Hebrew word dad, meaning sexual love. Thus, at this point, active foreplay begins, whereas in the previous section, Solomon was merely eyeing the beauties of his new wife. Previously, he used the Hebrew word yafu, translated beautiful, which describes her love relative to the impression she made on him visually. But now, using the word tovu, also translated beautiful, he describes her love relative to his physical experience with her. In verse 11, Solomon tells Shulamit that your lips are like virgin honey that flows of itself from the honeycomb. Previously, in verse 3 of this chapter, her lips were described as how they appeared to his sight, that is, the color of them. But now, as foreplay begins with the kissing of the lips, he is describing them according to his physical experiences with them. Verse 12, a garden locked is my sister, my bride, a rock garden locked, a spring sealed up. In verse 12, Shulamit's female genitals are described in terms of a garden not at all unusual in the literature of the ancient world. Her sexual organs are a locked garden with a fenced enclosure around it. She is also a locked spring. A locked garden and a locked spring mean that no one has access to these things but the rightful owner. On the other hand, a spring sealed up is one that is shut up against all impurities. The point is that Shulamit is a virgin. As a locked garden and a locked spring, only the rightful owner is to have access to her and open her. Fountain seal means no one else has ever had her, and hence she was kept from all impurities of fornication. Solomon, the rightful owner, now desires sexual satisfaction with her, and only by her will he be satisfied. Let's read verses 13 through 15. Your shoots are an orchard of pomegranates with choice fruits, henna with nard plants, nard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all the trees of frankincense, myrrh and aloes, along with all the finest spices. You are a garden spring, a well of fresh water, and streams flowing from Lebanon. The shoots of verse 13 and the well of fresh water are things that spring or flow from within. In verses 13b through 15, the well of fresh water are things that spring or flow from within. There is given the figure of fragrant plants which were used for the purpose of sexual arousal and stimulation. Solomon is describing the lubricating secretions resulting from the foreplay and needed for intercourse. Nard was a spice used to arouse sexual passion, and the henna was a plant with fragrant yellow and white flowers. Saffron was obtained from the crocus and used as a condiment. Calamus was a plant with a reed-like stem and tawny color imported from India. Cinnamon came from the East Indies and aloes from India. Thus, the foreplay has reached a stage of excitement where the lubricating juices have begun to flow and preparation for intercourse. Verse 16, Awake, O north wind, and come, wind of the south. Make my garden breathe out fragrance. Let its spices be wafted abroad. May my beloved come into his garden and eat its choice fruits. At this point, Shulamit speaks in verse 16. In Israel, the north and south winds promote growth in the garden if they come and interchange at proper times. As a result, the entire garden becomes a sea of incense and fragrance, and the garden itself blows out its fragrance. And so foreplay, administered properly and timely, causes Shulamit's garden to breathe out its spices. It shows that Shulamit's sexual organs are fully ready for intercourse. She now invites Solomon to enjoy her sexually. Solomon had waited until she was ready for him, and now she signals that she is. So Solomon is invited to enjoy his garden, for she indeed belongs to him. Chapter 5, verse 1. I have come into your garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh along with my balsam. I have eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I have drunk my wine and my milk. Eat, friends, drink, and imbibe deeply, O lovers. In answer to Shulamit's request in the previous verse, verse 16, Solomon comes into his garden, and this marks the consummation of the wedding night. The myrrh, balsam, honeycomb, honey, wine, and milk all point to the pinnacle of full enjoyment and satisfaction of sexual love. The gathering, eating, and drinking are all interchangeable figures describing the excitement of sexual love. While these words describe the consummation of the marriage, they would also be the words of Solomon's morning greeting to Shulamit, who was now fully become his own. He verbalizes and communicates to her his pleasure. This reflection ends with a refrain, from the daughters of Jerusalem. Eat, friends, drink, and imbibe deeply, O lovers. The chorus pronounces a sanction of the wedding union and encourages them, now that they are husband and wife, to be drunk with sexual